Joan and Larry Cutler are driving to their granddaughter's gender reveal party. They're bickering, as they often do, about directions, about snacks, about little things that don't matter. But underneath the banter is something heavy. Joan has terminal cancer. They've decided to keep it quiet until after the party, when they'll finally tell the family. The party is full of joy. Kids run around, relatives laugh, and the air is buzzing with anticipation. A great-granddaughter finds an old photo of Joan in her youth, standing beside her first husband, Luke, who died in the Korean War. The family marvels at the picture, unaware of the emotions it stirs in Joan. Then, suddenly, Larry eats a pretzel, chokes, and collapses backward onto the balloons. The reveal? It's a girl. But Larry doesn't get to see it. Larry wakes up on a train. He looks young again, confused but curious. Across from him sits Anna, his afterlife coordinator. She explains, he died from choking, and in the afterlife, people appear as they did when they were happiest. Anna takes him to a hotel where souls stay for a week before choosing their eternity. Larry wanders into the bar and meets the bartender, Luke. Luke has been waiting over 60 years for Joan. He explains the rules. Once you choose your eternity, you can't leave. If you try, you're thrown into the void, a place of endless darkness. Larry is shaken but tries to stay hopeful. Larry picks a sunny beach eternity, even though Joan always hated sand. He writes her a note, hoping she'll join him. But when Joan dies, she arrives young again. Larry rushes to her, only to see her reunited with Luke. Joan arrives at the hotel confused, disoriented, and flooded with emotions. She's young again, but the weight of her years, her choices, and her grief still sits heavy on her shoulders. Her coordinator, Ryan, is cheerful and persuasive, gently nudging her toward Luke. He paints Luke as the romantic figure who waited faithfully for decades, the man who never stopped loving her. Larry, desperate not to lose her, tries to prove his devotion in his own way. He arranges what he thinks will be a grand gesture, a Dean Martin performance, knowing Joan adored his music. But instead of the smooth crooner she remembers, it's a washed-up impersonator, drunk and sloppy, begging for attention. The performance collapses into embarrassment. Luke steps in, protective and strong, knocking the impersonator out before he can humiliate Joan further. Larry rushes in, frustrated that he failed to be there for her when she needed him most. The two men clash, their voices rising, their insecurities spilling out. Joan, overwhelmed by the chaos, finally snaps. She orders them both to stop, her voice sharp and commanding. For a moment, the room falls silent. The forest welcomed Joan with a hush, as though the world itself held its breath. She followed Luke into the heart of the woods, where towering trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches weaving a canopy of shifting light. Each step carried her deeper into a realm untouched by time, where silence was not emptiness but presence. At last they reached the lake. Its surface lay still, a mirror of sky and shadow, so perfect it seemed less water than doorway. Joan gazed upon it, feeling both awe and unease, as if she were standing at the threshold of another existence. Luke called this place his eternity, a sanctuary where the boundaries of life dissolved into something vast, something eternal. The archives were vast, lined with shelves that seemed to stretch without end. Joan walked beside Luke, her eyes scanning the countless records of lives and moments preserved in eternity. Then she stopped. One entry caught her attention. It was her own, a record of her meeting with Larry. Luke noticed immediately. His expression changed, the calm reverence he had carried into the archives collapsing into anger. He stepped closer, his voice sharp and accusing. To him, the record was not just history. It was proof, undeniable and permanent. Joan tried to explain, her words faltering in the heavy silence of the hall. But Luke's anger grew louder, echoing against the stone walls. The archives, once a sanctuary of memory, now felt hostile, every shelf pressing down on them, amplifying the confrontation. Luke's fury was raw. He saw betrayal written into the very fabric of eternity, and Joan stood defenseless before it. The archives did not soften the truth. They exposed it, magnified it, and forced both of them to face it without escape. Joan steps into Larry's eternity, a wide, golden beach where the waves roll in gently, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Larry is waiting for her, sitting in a chair with his feet buried in the sand. When he sees her, his face lights up, but there's sadness in his eyes. They walk along the shoreline together, the water brushing against their ankles. Larry talks about their years together, the family dinners, the vacations, the quiet nights when they didn't need words to feel close. He admits he regrets dying first, leaving Joan to face her illness alone. "I should have been there," he says softly. Joan squeezes his hand, but her face shows the weight of her struggle. She tells him the choice is tearing her apart. Luke represents the love of her youth, the man she lost too soon. Larry represents the life she built, the man who stood beside her through decades of joy and hardship. "How do I choose between the man I dreamed of and the man I lived with?" she whispers. The waves crash louder, as if echoing her turmoil. The hotel room was tense from the moment they entered. Joan sat between Luke and Larry, the weight of what they had just seen in Larry's eternity pressing down on all three of them. Luke's anger surfaced quickly. He accused Joan of betrayal, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Larry pushed back, defending himself and challenging Luke's claims. The two men argued fiercely, their words colliding, each trying to assert control over the truth. Joan tried to intervene, but her voice was drowned out by their shouting. The confrontation spiraled, Luke's fury, Larry's defiance, and Joan caught in the middle, unable to stop the clash. When the argument finally broke, Joan was left shaken. Confusion clouded her thoughts, devastation weighed on her chest, and the pressure of their accusations pressed heavily on her. In that hotel room, surrounded by anger and mistrust, Joan realized she was trapped between two eternities, and neither offered her peace. Later, Joan sits with her friend Karen, sipping wine. Karen listens patiently as Joan pours out her confusion, reminding her that love isn't always about passion. Sometimes it's about partnership, about the life you build together. Meanwhile, Luke and Larry find themselves at the bar. At first, they drink in silence, the tension thick between them. But as the alcohol loosens their tongues, they begin to talk. Larry admits he proposed to Joan at the docks on purpose, always feeling like he was competing with Luke's memory. He confesses he lived much of his life in Luke's shadow, wondering if Joan ever compared them. Luke, in turn, admits his envy. He never got to build a family with Joan, never got to grow old with her. He watched from afar, waiting, while Larry lived the life he always wanted. For the first time, both men see each other not as rivals, but as flawed, vulnerable men who love the same woman in different ways. Their voices soften, and for a brief moment, they share respect. Joan, after much reflection, makes her decision. She chooses neither Luke nor Larry. Instead, she decides to create her own eternity, one where she can live freely, without hurting either man. She picks Paris, a city she always dreamed of, with Karen by her side. When she tells Larry, he doesn't fight her. Instead, he gently tells her she should choose Luke, because he believes she was happiest with him. His words are heavy, filled with love and sacrifice. Joan hugs him tightly, tears in her eyes. It's a goodbye, but also an acknowledgement of the life they shared, a life that shaped her more than any dream ever could. At first, Joan tries to settle into Luke's eternity. The rocky wilderness, the crisp air, the quiet moments. It feels familiar, almost comforting. Luke is gentle, attentive, and eager to make up for lost time. But Joan's heart keeps wandering. Everywhere she turns, memories of Larry surface. She sees flashes of their children growing up, birthdays filled with laughter, quiet evenings when Larry held her hand after long days. She remembers arguments that ended in forgiveness, and the way Larry always made her feel safe even when life was messy. Her love with Luke was young, passionate, and full of promise. But her life with Larry was real, built on decades of shared responsibility, joy, and struggle. The contrast becomes unbearable. Joan realizes that while Luke represents what might have been, Larry represents what truly was. Luke notices her distance. He sees her slipping away, revisiting memories that don't include him. Heartbroken, he admits he cannot compete with the life she built with Larry. In a moment of painful honesty, Luke tells Joan that if she must leave, he will help her. He would rather lose her than trap her in a love that no longer feels whole. With Luke's help, Joan sneaks into the memory exhibit. She takes a hidden key and pushes through the glowing red doors. Immediately, alarms sound. Afterlife guards spot her and give chase. She runs through corridors of memories, her wedding day with Larry, the birth of her children, family dinners, even the quiet mornings of coffee and routine. Each memory fuels her determination to escape. The guards close in, shadows stretching across the walls. Joan bursts into the station, breathless and terrified. Anna and Ryan, now a couple themselves, see her desperation. They know the rules, but they also know love when they see it. Without hesitation, they shield Joan from the guards and guide her toward Larry. Larry, now working as the bartender, looks up and sees Joan. Their eyes meet. Relief, longing, and recognition all at once. He rushes to her side. Together, with Anna and Ryan's help, they slip past the guards and escape into the tunnel. On the other side, Joan and Larry step into a new eternity. It looks just like their old neighborhood in Oakdale, the houses, the trees, the sidewalks they once walked together. It's quiet, familiar, and filled with the warmth of home. Joan smiles. "It's perfect," she says. Larry takes her hand, and together they walk forward, not into a fantasy, but into the life they built, carried into eternity. Because eternity isn't about who you loved first. It's about who you built a life with.